Welcome to another episode of Stories from the Edge of Life. We have once again a very special guest, Dr. Marcin Chwistek. Did I get that right?
You got it right, yes.
All right, thank you. Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Sure. So my name is Marcin, and I'm a palliative medicine physician, currently at Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia. Oh, I
Sorry, I
lost.
was on mute.
Okay.
I'm Parag Bhardwaj. I'm a hospice and palliative medicine physician in the US as well. So, Marcin, I've known you for quite a few years, and we got into this field quite early. I don't know when you did your fellowship, but when I trained, it wasn't even a recognized field within the US. So before we get into that, tell us about what got you interested in medicine in the first place, and how because you're originally from Poland. So tell us about your whole journey, how you ended up here, and how you found your home with palliative care.
Sure. Happy to share the story, and it's one of those things, and I think Stephen Jobs said that really well in one of his, I think, commencement speech, that you can only connect the dots looking backward, but you never sort of connect them looking forward, right? And I think that's you make decisions in life the best way you can, but you really don't know where they're going to lead you. Only looking back, you can sort of try to make sense of it. So I think it's sort of in similar, when I look at my pathway as a physician, because honestly, I wasn't sure. I meet people, I meet students or fellows, I talk with them. Some of them knew from the very early age they wanted to be physicians. I really didn't. So and it didn't sort of materialize to me until probably mid of high school. And I think we are all products of our contexts, right? And what's happening in the world at large and in a sort of your immediate community at the time when you make those decisions. And again, I was in Poland. This is probably mid 80s or so. So sort of time when we were still part of the Eastern Bloc, kind of isolated from the rest of the world, still under those pretty significant influence of the Soviet Union, and all of those things happening. So I think that had a lot to do with my choice of medicine. I thought about other things. I thought about languages. I thought about literature. And, as a typical teenager, I think you sort of vacillate. I have my daughter is 17 now, so this is, I see what she's going through. So I clearly kind of also didn't have a clear calling about this. But I think one of the things that made me think about medicine was the fact that at that time I imagined that being a doctor would allow me to sort of practice independently. And it was one of those few professions where I would have direct relationship with patients and would not be as dependent on what's going on around me, right? And how much the state or the healthcare system would really have effect on what I did. Well, it wasn't, looking back, obviously it wasn't entirely correct, but that's what sort of I thought about this. And, I liked science, and I always liked the sort of the humanistics aspects of medicine, really getting to know other people and taking care of them. So I think that all naturally kind of led me to eventually choose medicine. So I was accepted to the medical school in Krakow, Poland, I was born about 40 miles west from Krakow. So this was sort of the natural choice, the closest medical school, but also a beautiful city with rich traditions of large university town as well. So many students. So it was a really a fantastic time for me. But medical schools in Poland, as most in Europe, are 6 years typically. So you go to medical school right after your high school. So, so you kind of make your decision when you're 18, or not optimal, but the way this is the way it is, and you get thrown into the sort of the first 2 years of medical school right away. So it tends to get, it was quite difficult and challenging because you're, only 18 or 19 and you have to deal with all of those things. Now, that's the medical school. And after that, I sort of, I graduated in the early 90s. This was the time, so after I graduated from medical school, I did my internship as we typically do, the 12 months of internship, and then had to make decision of what to do next. And what also happened, it was kind of obviously in retrospect, a very eventful thing for me, was that my mom got really sick during my medical school and actually died during my 4th year of medical school. So she was diagnosed with advanced colon cancer and died within a few months. So obviously that was a big sort of event for me at that time, but also kind of got me closer to thinking about oncology. Naturally, I think you tend to think about those things that they sort of affect you deeply. And I also remember, outside of sort of the personal issues, I remember when we did our rotation during medical school in oncology. I remember that one of our attendings presented then a case of a young guy. I think he had lymphoma. But I was so mesmerized by the idea that you could actually see someone, he had large cervical lymph nodes, and you could see it from across the room. And for me, this was fascinating, that you can see a disease that's so serious, that potentially has has a potential to really take your life, and you can see it across from the room, and you can actually do something as an oncologist about it. So I think that, and of course connecting it with my own personal stories, I think made me think of oncology as a specialty. So I started actually in radiation oncology because that was the path then to start working with cancer patients right away. So I started my training. It did help that I was in the math and physics class in high school, because the first year of radiation oncology is a lot of physics. I did not love that, but sort of stuck with it. But then again, we are sort of now in mid-90s, and the situation in Poland has changed dramatically. We had Lech Wałęsa and Solidarity movement, the first free election. So things have dramatically changed politically, but healthcare kind of stayed behind some of it. As you know, healthcare does not change quickly or rapidly despite everything else changing. So it wasn't a good time then to think about training and specialties and fellowships. So the idea of trying to do it outside of the country, occurred to me, and also coincided with a series of articles that were published in the our medical school newspaper. They were written by a Polish pathologist who immigrated to the US, and he sort of would describe what the process of becoming a physician in the US looks like. Because remember, this is pre-internet. There's no internet. You can't look up anything online. So someone has to tell you what the steps are. You have to read about it somewhere. So that helped, because I actually started some correspondence with him, and he would sort of write back and help me navigate the whole process. It also helped that at that time you could actually take the USMLE exams in Poland. So I did, but the problem was that I spoke no English. I studied German through most of my life in school and then in medical school. I had never been outside of Poland, I think, at the time, and never been to any English-speaking country for sure. I was maybe, I think, visiting Czech Republic or Germany, and I had no access to any of the materials, because again, no internet, no bookstores that could really get you what you needed. Those books were not available. My dad was an engineer, and he went on at that time went on a business trip to Chicago. So I gave him a list of books, and God bless him, he came back with a suitcase full of the USMLE prep books, and everything else that I got from the pathologist in Virginia, who told me those are the books you need to get and to study. So this is how it started. And to make a sort of long story short or shorter, I go through the whole preparation, take the USMLE exams, pass the exams, and then apply for the residency, and landed with a residency in Connecticut. So this is internal medicine. So this is now 1996, where I sort of land for the first time in the U.S. and in July then started my residency. So 3 years of residency, right, and then of internal medicine. But I am a foreign medical graduate, so of course the issues of visa and become quite important. So I actually took a job as a primary care doctor after that in Wisconsin, and the job that would allow me to sort of get my visa and then get sponsorship for the green card and start the whole process. So I was there for about 4 years. This was sort of also a very formative time, practicing as a primary care doctor, really getting to know the system, figuring out how things work. During that time, I also got interested in integrative medicine. And part of it was, and this will kind of come back later, but part of it was because I had so many patients with chronic illnesses, as any primary care doctor does, and also many patients asking you about other things, non-pharmacological things, and I had no idea about any of this. So I enrolled in the integrative medicine fellowship with Andrew Weil at the University of Arizona. So I did that for 2 years while being in practice in Wisconsin. But then the itch to go back to oncology returned. And I thought that, but also I think returned, but also changed a little bit, because I no longer realized I no longer wanted to go back and become an oncologist to, prescribe chemotherapy and treat the cancer. But I wanted to really more focus on taking care of patients with cancer. And so this is where my shift happened to go into palliative medicine. So I applied to fellowship and was accepted at Sloan Kettering in New York City. So now I'm moving from north central Wisconsin to Manhattan, and most of my patients at the time thought I was completely crazy. And how can anyone move from Wisconsin to New York City? So that was an interesting time. But of course, then I'm in the midst of a busy city, and back on the East Coast and learning palliative medicine. And this was also a sort of lucky time for me, because it was still the department that Kathy Foley was still there, and her office was just across the fellows room's office, and many other people who were sort of the pioneers of the field. Ross Portner just left, I think, a few years before that, but many others were still there. So that's my fellowship, and then after that, I took a job with UPMC in Pittsburgh, and started working there, and I've been there for almost a couple of years, but really wanted to focus on working with cancer patients. So the opportunity opened up with Fox Chase, and I moved there in 2006, and I've been here since then. So that's a sort of the story in a nutshell.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating because it's got politics, it's got history, it's got your personal, journey. You got things going on in your personal life, and then of course you were a med student at that time as well. So first of all, sorry for your loss at such a young age that you had to deal with. And yeah, it sounds like it was a time of turmoil, right? And I can relate to a lot of things that you said in terms of the internet not being there, trying to look for the resources and so forth. Let's come back to you know when one is going through medical school, like you had mentioned, you started med school at a young age. It takes some time to start getting accustomed to the language, right? It's a different language. And at the same time, to have such a personal loss.
Mhm.
How did you deal with that? And what kept you going?
So before we get to this, I'll tell you a funny story about language. So what happened is that in Polish medical schools, and I'm not sure if this is still happening or not, but at that time, the physicians would use Latin to write the diagnosis. And obviously it comes from the era where, you wanted probably to sort of hide it maybe from even patients, or sort of, this was the language of medicine. It sounded differently, so we all had to learn Latin. And I remember
Interesting.
and I remember coming from my first anatomy class. So we went to check it out, and you check the schedule for the upcoming classes, and the entire schedule about what we are supposed to know in is written in Latin, and I don't understand a word of it because I had no Latin in my life, and I was like, no one told me. So it's funny, but I for some reason I really didn't realize this, and they really didn't care, and you kind of had to learn this on the go. Of course, you didn't master the entire language, but you had to memorize basically your entire anatomy in Latin. So that was the different, it was literally different.
Literally, yeah.
When it comes to my mom, I think, I don't think I processed it at that time at all. I don't think I had the time. I didn't stop. This was sort of in the midst of my medical school, as you know, super busy time with multiple exams. She died in June, so this was right before the summer break. So I think that maybe helped a little bit. I remember I moved some of my exams from June to the fall, but that was about it. And I don't think I ever sort of at that time processed any of that on a deeper level. I was very angry for a while about the healthcare system because, in fact, she died at the cancer institute that I later worked at. And she died in the academic at the university hospital. So also she was a patient in the buildings and in the hospitals where I had my classes, and so it was difficult for sure. But I know that it was in my early 20s, 22, I think 23. A lot of I think I had a lot of sort of anger, because her end of life was far from ideal. And of course I know this now. At the time there was no palliative care as a specialty. um, but I felt, I had this sort of uh, understanding, the kind of a gut feeling that this is not how things should have gone, that should have looked differently. She had a very advanced disease, but then died very probably from a PE. So in a very sort of dramatic way overnight, was coded, died in the ICU. Which of course, this is the things that we're trying to, most of the time now in our work, to prevent and sort of talk about, or at least sort of, obviously no one has discussed any of that with either my dad or I at the time. And so I had a lot of sort of resentment about this. But it took me, I think, a long time to sort of process all of this and really, um, um, you know, um, see this from a little bit different perspective. And I think being medical student time actually did not help me, because it was sort of, I medicalized this too, I think, for myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely does. So you mentioned that you were working as a primary care physician and you wanted to become an oncologist. So do you think you're a palliative care physician today because of the experience your mother went through?
Partially, for sure. I mean, I don't think this is all related to this, but I would also, I think, not be totally honest if I said it had no bearings on it. I think it was one of the many things that made me think. So I think, I came to palliative care from oncology, from we all come to this from different backgrounds, but mine was oncology, and really thinking about, I'm going to be a radiation oncologist and I'm going to treat cancer. And I had this fascination with cancer as a disease. There's all this social stigma related to the disease. It's kind of I also saw the fear in my mom, what cancer means. I saw how poor her symptom control was, and especially pain. So I also have lots of interest in cancer pain, and I'm actually board certified in pain medicine as well. And I think that's definitely part of that experience. And I really feel like, we didn't do, or at the time didn't do, a good job of taking care of her symptoms and pain especially. So I think all of this certainly had an effect on me. I don't think it was the only thing, but yes.
Often our past experiences shape our future decisions, right? So, uh, when did you first hear about palliative care?
Um, that's it. I think it was during my time as a primary care doctor. I almost certainly did not hear about it before that. I think I went through my entire residency without hearing about this. But again, this is mid 90s when I went through my 97 to 2000 when I went through my residency. So that wasn't a popular choice of the medical specialty at the time by any means. So I think I heard about it first during my internal medicine year. Again, I think those time is also the shift when happened to me, when I really sort of started taking care of patients with chronic illnesses, and I think I thought, well, this might be the specialty that I want to devote my life to, really, and this is when I think the shift happened.
Yeah, I'll tell you my experience. I first heard
Hmm.
about palliative care, hospice, and actually I heard about hospice first as
Mm.
a potential career when I was doing my internship in 2000. And it was just like there is something that one could choose to do, and like you said, it's a bit frowned upon as to as a career choice. So tell us a
Mm.
little bit more about the feedback you got. You mentioned about folks thinking that why would somebody move from where you were to New York? But professionally, what was the feedback you were getting from your colleagues in terms of making that career choice?
I mean, I think it's rare. So I think it's rare to go into practice and then go to fellowship. And certainly people do this, right? And you see that from time to time. But majority of people go to fellowship straight after residency because it's much easier that way. You're sort of in the mode of training, and you have contacts in the academic world, people write letters for you, etc. I had to take this break because of being a foreign medical graduate. I felt that I needed to take care of this first and get out of my way, so to speak, and not to worry about this in the future. Uh, I think they were all surprised. Um, and again, you're not going into cardiology or, GI, this sort of highly recognized subspecialties, and you're going to palliative medicine. So I think most of them were surprised, to tell the truth. My patients were surprised, but colleagues, I think, were surprised too, and probably kind of looking at it, a little bit with a suspicion with what it, but um, hard to tell. I'm not sure. I think things changed for me once I moved, and once I, joined the fellowship at Memorial. Um, you know, that was quite different because then you are among the people who kind of think, you have this camaraderie now of people who think about the same aspects of medicine very similarly to you, and I think that gives you a sense of um, that you are within your own people, the tribe.
Great point. Yeah, and were you surprised about anything you learned? And the reason why I'm asking that is, uh, when I applied for the fellowship and I got in, a lot of my peers questioned, the wasting a year uh, to train in something which is not very well understood, right? And then, of course, I doubted my decision of going for a fellowship, but I'm glad I did, because when I started my fellowship, I was like, oh my God, there's a very different way of taking care of patients. So, did you
Mhm.
experience? Did you know exactly what you were getting yourself into, and were there any surprises after you started your training?
I think there were. I think there were. So, and I think a lot depends on the training and the place you go to. So, as I mentioned, I went to Memorial Sloan Kettering, which was, it's a tertiary cancer center with and the fellowship at the time with a very heavy focus on cancer pain management. So, a lot of what we learned in the fellowship was really focused on cancer pain management, like most of it actually, very heavy on that. um I think that wasn't that much surprising, and this is what I liked, in a sense. I think so. What I think was surprising is then how you, when you go to practice, and how in palliative medicine, I always tell our fellows, is that your job could look very differently depending on where you practice and what you choose to do, even though it's the same specialty, and it can be drastically different. And there's so many ways that you can utilize it, and kind of, in a sense, shape your career and shape your work, but also be shaped by it at the same time, as you can't avoid everything and mold it to your liking. So, um, you know, for example, I think, one of the things that substance use disorders, right? This was not something that I was thinking about part of medicine, but then it became a significant part of what I do, because when you deal with opioids, for whatever reason, you have to also deal with the substance use disorder. So that was a surprising aspect to my career, something that I didn't expect that I would have to deal with, and I had to learn this. This was, doesn't come with my training, or very little of it came with my training. I kind of have to, and I think most of us, especially in palliative medicine, like, I have my wish that the training should really look differently, and I think probably does nowadays, more so than it did during my time. But we had very little education about this. But this was one of the surprising aspects of it. Um, and there are probably others too, because for me, practicing in the cancer center now for the last 17 years, I see how oncology has changed, right? So when I went to medical school, still advanced cancer meant death sentence, and that typically death sentence within months, years at the most, right? When I started, I think the life expectancy for someone with metastatic lung cancer was 12 to 18 months. Now it's completely changed. So now the type of patients we're taking care of, the profile of the patients have changed, because now we're taking care of patients with chronic illness. Even though they may have advanced cancer, many live for years with advanced cancer. So the entire aspects of how we take care of them has changed, and you have to change your thinking, because it's not the same approach now that you have. The patients obviously have new symptoms. They have to deal with the uncertainty. Everything gets, in a sense, stretched out, and it poses, a new challenges for the patients, of course, primarily, and their caregivers, but for us as well on the other side, because we need to help them manage this. And that's new. That didn't exist there before. But and again, it's I think in medicine, it's one of the exciting aspects of being a physician, is that those things kind of change and keep you on your toes.
Absolutely, very well said. Because you're right. There are a lot of cancers that seemed incurable, but now, with the new advances, patients live for a long time. Actually, I have patients with stage 4 cancers and are in remission.
Yeah,
And yeah, the science is definitely changing, and so does our field. And so it makes it exciting.
absolutely.
So we're almost at time. Is there
Okay.
anything that you would like to let our audience know about our field, in terms of you know there are a lot of misconceptions about it, right?
hmm I mean, and certainly the misconceptions, I think you probably spoke about many times. I think we're still. I think people should not be afraid to see us, right? And I think that's maybe the main message, that we can be helpful in a lot of different ways, and I think we can be also helpful a lot earlier than people tend to think about us. And I think that's the sort of main message. And I think it's easy to explain in a sense that, when we have more time, we really can form deeper relationship with patients. And I think that helps us and that helps the patients and their caregivers, because we have time to talk about things, as opposed to being involved at the very end. So I think that's probably what I would sort of, that's my main message. Ask for us, look us up, and if this is not being offered, many cancer centers, especially nowadays, do have palliative care. Sometimes patients don't know it. It's still surprising to me, even in our own center, that they come and say, "Well, I wish I knew that you were here." So I think that always is a reminder to me that we need to be more aggressive about sort of letting people know that we exist, and that's an option that they could hopefully benefit from.
Very well put. So, with that, we will conclude our discussion, and we hope to have you back. Um, but thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for sharing your journey and for what you do.
Well,
Been
my pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a
Thank you
pleasure.
for giving me the opportunity to share my story.